feeling good, can I tell?
My name is Brother Eric. We'd like to welcome everyone to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Louis Ray Rivera, Amos Wilson, El-Haj Malik Al-Shabazz, Gil Noble, Minister Khaled, Brother Assar, and we just added Alton Maddox Jr., who just made this transition. Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Professor Simmons, Brother Harold, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune, big cars, a lot of money, because they believed in bringing information to the global black community and their people. We always want to keep them alive and try our best to keep their name going. We never want to forget them. Brother Raji is going to bring the camera over to the Amos collection, I call this. This is to help Brother Sababu and African World Info Systems to continue the great work of Amos Wilson. We have Blueprint for Black Power, Black on Black Violence, the Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. And you hear a lot of people talking about black on black violence and why we doing this to each other and this and that, and every big city mayor and you name it, they got some kind of problem or they got an answer. But nobody never mentions the great Amos Wilson. Sababu's last work in honor of Amos Wilson, the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat toward a reclamation of the African mind, the falsification of African consciousness, issues of manhood in black and white, awakening the natural genius of black children, the developmental psychology of the black child, African-centered consciousness versus the New World Order. And you hear a lot of people talking about the New World Order. Every talking head is talking about the New World Order and this and that. But you never hear anybody talk about Amos Wilson. In honor of Louis Ray Rivera, Jazz in Jail, when Professor Mackey left us, Louis Ray Rivera would come down here, he took up the mantle. And he would come down here and talk. And he would talk for a couple of hours. And we would walk him home. And he still talked for another hour and a half while we walking him home. That's in honor of Louis Ray Rivera, Brother Earl Ponder revealing the unspeakable Bible verses, the Holy Trinity, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, S.K. Damian, the distorted truths, the bastardization of African cosmology, and Sister Empress Jamaica, confronting the color crisis in the African diaspora. We have these books at the William Mackey Jr. History Club to help with information. Now I got some publications right here that's interesting reading. Carol Alexander, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, White Rage. The Invention of the White Race, The Origin of Racial Oppression in Anglo-America, Theodore Allen. I just happened to pick this up. I was searching and walking and I saw this book, The Lost Jews, Last of the Ethiopian Philosophers. And when they had came out with that Hebrews, the Negro stuff, I just picked that up. In honor of Dr. Randy Short, The Impact of Religious Slavery Revealed. Brother Harold, secret pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine. I didn't know nothing about this book, and Brother Harold brought it up. So I wound up catching it. Now I'm going to come with the Coupe de Ville. You hear a lot of people crying for civil rights and human rights in honor of Charles Hamilton Houston and the struggle for civil rights. They ain't pay no damn dues. So Charles Hamilton Houston, and they getting everything and ain't pay no dues. The Irritated Genie, Io Kamati, and this is unbelievable. It's a small book, but the research on it is unbelievable. Jays are the problem. World War III, COVID-19, media censorship, war on the horizon. You could get the publication from the Irritated Genie on war on the horizon. Dr. Scott Whitaker. He was on Darren Muhammad's show this Saturday. He was smoking. Medicine, the causes and solution to diseases, malnutrition, and the medical sins that are killing the world. He's out of Atlanta, Georgia, and Dr. Scott Whitaker, he did an excellent program on Darren. You hear a lot of people talk about Atlanta, Georgia. In my personal opinion, the only one that cared about the people in Atlanta was Cynthia McKinney. And she had this book, When China Sneezes, from the coronavirus lockdown to the global political economic crisis. Cynthia McKinney. Edwin Down, Causes Unknown, an epidemic of sudden death in 2020, in 2021 and 2022. He used to be an analyst for BlackRock. This is an excellent book. And now I'm going to give you the Coupe de Ville and the Seville. The truth about COVID-19, exposing the Great Reset, lockdown, vaccine passports, Dr. Joseph McCullough and Ronald Cummings. And this is the grand finale. The real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the global war on democracy and public health, Robert Kennedy. Once you get these books and start reading it, you're going to have a different perspective on the stuff that they're bringing out today. So we have these, and it's good reading and good research. I'm going to give you some events. This Friday, they're going out to Ferncliff for Malcolm X's birthday, and they go out there every year. And I don't know if they're having buses leaving 125th Street, but and I don't know if they're having buses going out there. Last year they did. So
Adam Clayton Powell.
So they got buses, okay. Okay. Thorough Black Talk, they usually leave at 9 o'clock. Thorough Black Talk, Tad, Keisha, Ashe, Sister Brother Black, and what's the other young lady? Marcia. It's Sister Marcia. They come on every Thursday, and that's an excellent program. That's the hottest show on the East Coast. Thorough Black Talk. Also, Philadelphia Connection with Sister Empress Chi. Blog Talk Radio out of Philly. That comes on every Saturday at 10:30. And the number is 1-319-527-6189. And Sister Empress and the family in Philadelphia is doing an excellent program. Brother Io Kamati, WSYP 95.1, Birmingham, Alabama, with Brother Anthony Mohammed, that's Sankofa Revolutionary Radio. Every Monday at 10 o'clock, and Jeannie is having they've been doing a 3-part series with him and I forgot the other guy's name, but it's 6-part series they're doing. 10 o'clock on Mondays, and oh man, I got to give it to them. That's Revolutionary Radio, Sankofa Radio, 10 o'clock Monday, and you can call in. Our Baltimore family, State of the City, 1590. on TuneIn Radio and Instagram under Darren Muhammad State of the City. He comes on Saturday at 12 o'clock and he comes on Wednesday, sometime Thursday. So Darren Muhammad is doing an excellent job letting everybody know what's going on. Every Tuesday, Dr. Aline program, Your Immunity Project, 7 p.m. also on Kyle Finding Radio on Thursdays. Okay. Every Friday at 8 o'clock, Brother Trust Graham and African Echoes study group out of Newark. They're doing the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat toward a reclamation of the African mind. If you want information on that, Brother True is on, and Jay Gardner, they will send you the information where you could join that study group. And when you start dealing with Brother Trust, he sure will give you another aspect on study. Also, the History Hitmen out of Asbury Park, Brother True and them, they're doing, that program comes on at 1:30, and they're doing the destruction of black civilization. Brother Trust Graham is also the mediator of that study group, the Know Thyself study group out of Asbury Park with Brother True and them. The Simotap organization, James McIntosh on WBAI. The program is Minefield, and they come on every Wednesday with Theodore Richard Dean and James McIntosh. I believe that's 2 to 2:30. But WBAI and Simotap organization will let you know everything that's going on. The Community Cop program is back on the block. Brother Mike Graves, Noah Lee, and Julian Harper, they're back on 5 o'clock on Tuesday on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, www.mnn.org. That's one of the hottest shows on the East Coast. And you can view all of their past lectures on YouTube under Community Cop and do your study and your research. Also, all the lectures on the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club, you can YouTube BK William Mackey Jr. History Club, and all our lectures will come up, and you can do research, go back into the lecture, do your study, and connect the dots. Also, the Jazzmobile, Wednesday, May 24th, the Mazika World Orphan Choir of Liberia at the chapel of the Interchurch Center, 61 Claremont Avenue. That's a jazz program, and I got the flyer on here. 61 Claremont Avenue, May 24th at 7 o'clock. Ladies and gentlemen, you could go on YouTube and look at Dr. Lewis's lectures, except for the other 2 lectures we have on him. I have to give you that on the hard copy. He's a great inspiration to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club.
Yes, sir.
I am so happy that he was willing to come back and join us. We haven't seen him in a while. He's a man and a man. Without further ado, give a big hand. First, I want to thank the people that came out and our family on the Zoom audience. Give yourself a big hand for supporting the William Mackey Jr. History Club, and thank you for coming out. Because at a time when people just don't want to hear it and they just don't want to know nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, give a great big hand to our good friend, Dr. Arthur Lewis, at the American Economics and Strategy Currency. Doc.
All right, Dr. Lewis. Good to see you, Dr. Lewis.
Yeah, Dr. Lewis.
Okay, Zoom audience. Thank you, Brother Ryan.
Good evening to all of the African people globally that are fortunate enough to be able to see what we're doing in Mackey's to the 3 lecture series. And I just want to give my appreciation to Ray and all of the other individuals who make it possible. to carry on. And why this lecture series, like many that he announced, is very important. You can measure it by the amount of opposition that the government and other agencies try to block certain types of information. So again, I just want to extend my appreciation for you giving me the honor, ability to talk to you, because it is very important. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to use this lecture or this talk as number one of two other parts. We're going to make it a three-part series. This part that we will speak about, the overall theme is, let's call it the global change. There's change globally that is coming about in different parts of the world. And so, what we're going to try to do is to give you a picture of what has been happening and is happening on a global scale. But we want to review some of the history of what has happened so that you can understand when we have the discussion. The handout today comprises 6 pages. And the purpose of why I do the presentation with handouts is for 2 reasons. One, so that you will have something to begin to research again. Second, for those individuals who cannot get the handout, we talk to each other in this lecture style with question and answers so that those individuals who cannot get the information will understand what it is that we are trying to do. Also, this type of presentation gives us the ability to use our skills of reading and thinking rather than a video. Many times individuals like PowerPoint presentation because it's visual, but we're trying to get information so that you can do further research. The first page of the 6-page handout, and we're going to read them for the audience, but I just want to let it has to do with a statement from the Primal Core as it relates to population in the world. So it's always good to review information that's still relevant to our condition here, and we'll read it specifically. The second handout deals with the United States of America and some of the policies that the country and the rulers of the United States of America have implemented against different types of people globally. And why this is important, you will see why later certain parts of the world are beginning to work collectively to better their life. The third page is going to deal with the Opium War number 1 and the Opium War number 2. And we will explain what that is. Next page is, we've read before many times, Medley Butler's War is a Racket. Each of these pages, each of these documents is put in to try to put together a global picture for those who have not done this particular research.
Yes, sir.
So we basically are trying to educate each other, everyone contributing whatever part they feel. The 5th page is on handout on Russia. And this handout on Russia will explain some of the origins of what is now presently occurring and what they call the Ukrainian-Russian war, which is presently in progress in Europe. And the last page deals with Russia and China. And I put together the emphasis on the origin of the United States of America, on Russia and China, because that's what is current as it relates to the United States in their international policies, with their war with, the proxy war with Russia, and the announcement by the government of the United States that they want to go to war with China in 3 years. Okay, so I'm going to read the statement from the final call. It's from the final call, March 16, 2023. I just picked it up a week ago, but I felt that it was important. And it's dealing with population. And they're reviewing the policy of the United States as it relates to the global population. And I'm going to read it here. The day message. We spoke on a plan by the government of the United States led by Dr. Henry Kissinger to engage in the worldwide depopulation of the darker people of the world. In 1974, Mr. Kissinger, Secretary of State under President Nixon, signed the National Security Memorandum 2000 titled Implication of a Worldwide Population Growth for the U.S. Security Overseas Interests. It was adopted an official policy in 1975 by President Gerald Ford. Those who analyzed the report said Dr. Kissinger proposed that the depopulation should be the highest priority of U.S. foreign policy towards the third world. And you ask, why is this relevant? Because you have to understand the foreign policy we only focusing on of the United States, and how the foreign policy, the population around the world affects the United States as it relates to natural resources and things they want to do globally. Any country, especially the United States, has two major policies. They have a domestic policy and they have a foreign policy. And you will see as we track it and we look in that the domestic and foreign policy are pretty much the same in what they're trying to do. And it goes on. Although this plan of action was to be achieved in developing countries, it was designed as a two-edged sword that could be swung with equal determination in both development in countries alike, because in developing countries like America, a growing number of third world people. So they're talking and saying this population idea, policy is relevant for us people who run the United States, to who countries outside the United States, and to people inside the United States. This document was signed by Henry Kissinger and directed to the Secretary of Defense, Agriculture, Central Intelligence, and the Deputy Secretary of State, and the Administrator of the Agency for International Development, with a copy to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The whole government, structural government, is involved here. This was taken like a theater war, and all fractions of government was introduced to develop the plan. We go to the next paragraph. Well, Kissinger prepared yet another depopulation manifesto for President Jim Carter called Global 2000, which detailed using food as a weapon to depopulate the third world. Third world definition is human beings other than white people. The first world we're talking about, their definition is white people, white countries, Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Let's get this clear about what we're dealing with, because these issues are the same issues that we face here, today, and globally. So that's why we bring it up. A person can't say, well, this was in 15 years ago. It's still a policy. I go on to the bottom. I'm sorry to tell you, they're planning death on a worldwide scale. They have used a series of methods to affect global population, including depleted uranium bombs, genetically engineered modified food, chemical additives in food, poisons in vaccines, famine, AIDS. So what they're just reviewing you to say, this is what you're still in. Now, we're going to go to the second page. When you consider that the agencies that keep track of global population are stating that, and I'm using the terms that are in the public domain and that are used in textbooks and stuff, so it's not that me making up these designations. That the white population, whatever that means, being 4% of the world's global population, is in decline. In order for you to maintain your population, they say you need to make 2.1 children because the children die. You have to replace. The man and woman has to replace itself. So any group that they study that has a population growth rate of 2.1, that population is steady.
Yes,
People
sir.
die, people go. They're stating in the demographics that you can change it, because I don't make up anything. Everything we read here comes from the public domain, and we as citizens are allowed to use it and educate ourselves on it. Your white people are in negative birth rate, that most of the Asian population, like Japan and South Korea are negative, they're losing. And they're saying the countries that are primarily holding their population and increasing are countries like India, continent of Africa, and most people of color. They have a positive growth rate. Some of the countries in Africa have a growth rate of 7. The man and woman make 7 children, so that's replacement and growth. Other countries like Japan are losing population. Now, people will say, well, what's the big deal about population when you got billions of dollars here and billions of dollars? So we ask the question, who or what is the most important thing in any society? Is it the millionaire, the billionaire? And those of us who understand nature, it's the woman, the female. So in other words, if you have men and women living in any society, and you say you can only have sex, but no babies, what would happen to the human race in 100 years? There wouldn't be anybody. That's nature. So that's the importance of people and population. In order for you as a country to be in the running, you got to have people. That's how important population is. So there are a lot of people who don't like the idea that the majority of the population of the world are people of color.
That's right.
But they won't pull out the textbook and ask how many millions of Africans were killed during, not thousands, tens of millions on the continent were killed during the transatlantic slave trade. How many tens of millions of indigenous people in this continent, in what you call America, were killed? How many millions in Canada, in Australia, New Zealand? The British historians are arguing with the Indian, we're talking the Indian, and they're arguing now how many indigenous people in India, that area was under British, were killed. So that 200 years that the British was in so-called India, Pakistan, the Indian scholars are saying that you white people in the East, the British who came there, you killed 70 million of us. The British said we only killed 50. So let anybody run that to you about all, it was just a few thousand, etc. That's how important it is. We're going to the next page, United States of America. This page we're going to read straight through because we just want to remind you of how this country was put together. You can tell a country about how that country is and how the country was put together. Because most countries that you see with borders, those borders weren't there 100 years or 200 years. Borders change. But let's see how the United States of America was put together. And let's see the way it was put together, is it still the same way that is run today? So we have feudalism, slavery and genocide. That's page 1. That's how the United States was put together. Feudalism, slavery and genocide. Slavery of the people who made up the so-called United States of America. The foundation of the United States, you've got to understand, it was feudalism, it was slavery and genocide. Slavery primarily to the African-based people, genocide to the indigenous people, and the way they ran it with the white landowner. It's feudalism. If you forget that, then you got big problems. The first Continental Congress in 1774 to 1781. The second Continental Congress, 1781 to 89. For those we're just reading the history, early history of the United States of America. Articles of Confederation, 1789. The U.S. independence, July 4th, 1776. The Constitution, all of that fundamentally does, who structured the country? White male landowners in the 13 colonies. So you understand what this country was like at that time. We go to the second strip. Who were the citizens of these 13 colonies which will become the United States? Who were citizens? The white male Anglo-Saxon landowners. Right. Only one. Now, who else lived in the early colonies, these 13 colonies? Indentured servants. The indentured servants were those whites that were brought over by the English, and they were mainly Scots and Irish and some Germans that the Anglo-Saxon had enslaved in Britain and brought here. Indentured servants is another term for slavery. And I had a discussion with a young fellow from an African-based person from Trinidad, and he was telling me about the good ancestors he had of the Indians, the indigenous Indians, because the British took Indians and they scattered them around the world. And so he said that his ancestors in Trinidad, the black, he was not talking about the African part, the Indian part, were indentured servants. I said, are you kidding? Indentured servants? Do you know the history of what the English killed tens of millions of so-called indigenous Indians in India, and now you telling me that they enslaved them and killed them, and then now you telling me they're going to scatter them around the world and give them a contract? Think. Who were in the colonies but had no standing? Those indentured white servants. So they had white slavery. The colonies here started with white slavery. Because people don't think that white people are still in a bad situation here. Africans who were enslaved, and they had a group of people called infidels. They were Jews, Moors, and Muslims. We could talk about what color they were, but those are the people. So you had a whole collection of people in colonies that were all slaves. Then referred to a book called A Color of Law, Forgotten History of How Our Government, our mean United States, segregated America. They created the redlining so that African-based people in the United States, this was starting in the 1930s, would be specifically segregated into concentration camps you call cities. And then you go back to ask about concentration camps. We know about they putting indigenous people in concentration camp, but we didn't consider that this segregation, the red line, you're concentrating people in concentration camps called cities. Then you can go back to when the English and the Boers are from the Holland and stuff, came to South Africa. And then their cousins, the English, came behind them and they had a war in South Africa. Who's going to run it? So around 1905, they were fighting. The English defeated their cousins, the Boers. The English put 80,000 of their Boers, men, women, children, in concentration camp, and they died in concentration camps. So you have the history there. So you got to ask, reservation for Indians? Cities for African folks? Did the Germans initiate this concept of concentration camp? Did they get it from their cousins there? Or did they come to the U.S. and say, you know how to concentrate the indigenous people. You got black people locked down. Teach us something. I'm asking the question. I'm not telling you this is what happened.
It happened.
Then we want to read Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. It takes 2 minutes. And we have to read it to remind us, because Smedley Butler masquerade, he went around the United States with the veterans and saying, you're fighting these wars and the masses of people, including you veterans, you're getting zero out of it. So he put together, you can buy about a 7-page book, this famous speech that we all read to tell you how the domestic and foreign policy was run in the United States. This outlines exactly how the United States was run and still is run, with a $3 trillion war in Afghanistan. So you could spy on the Russians, and spy on the Chinese, and you spy on the Indians by being in Afghanistan. Oh, by the way, Afghanistan has a lot of lithium and good poppy fields. War's a racket. So let's see how America has been running. War is a racket. It always has been. It is possible the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and loss of lives. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seemed to the majority of the people. We got to go into Afghanistan, but we will use up $3 trillion of your tax dollars. Only a small inside group. Who runs the domestic politics of the United States? Who decided to go to war with Afghanistan? Who decided to go to the Korean War? Did the people go for the war, or did a handful of people? So he's telling you the way it is. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few. That's your rich oligarchs that run your banks and your big corporations, at the expense of the very many. Out of the war, a few people make huge fortunes. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during the period I spent most of my time as a high-class muscleman for the big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. He's telling you, Arthur Lewis didn't say it. He's telling you how the country was run and still is run. That's why a handful of corporations with the banks, in complicit with the president and Congress, outsourced 50 million of your jobs. Okay? Outsource the factories. That's how China got re-industrialized. But do they tell the people why they did it? In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for the American interests in 1914. Mexican oil. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank. Telling you why they went in to rape the countries. Boys to collect revenue in. I helped in the raping of half dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown and Brothers in 1902, 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China, he's telling you when the United States, later on in the Opium Wars, you will see the role the United States played with Britain and France to put together and construct the global international narcotic trade. I didn't say it. He said it. And you will see who said it. So Arthur Lewis is not making it up. I'm only a reader. In China in 1927, I helped see to it that the Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on that. This is the history. They don't teach, they don't want to teach, and they're not going to do it. We're going to go to Opium War 1 and Opium War 2. We're going to read some of the details. Opium War 1 and Opium War 2 is when the Europeans, specifically the British, UK, and France and the United States, were in the expansion stage and they're beginning to do to the Asians going in what they did to us in Africa. Raiding the place. Opium War 1, 1839 to 1842. It was in China and it was a naval war. It was in the Qing dynasties against the UK, that's Britain. What was the trade? Furniture, porcelain, silk, tea, and opium. China had these things. What was the payment? In silver and opium. When China was trading with Spain, they used silver. Where did the Spanish get the silver? The Spanish stole it from the people in Central, South America, and Caribbean. And then when they went to the Philippines and conquered the Philippines, they had silver. So they could trade with China. We're using silver, but the Europeans didn't have any silver, any damn thing to trade. So they brought in opium. The British won that war. It was a naval war because the British and them were trying to get into China, but you have to, China is on an ocean, you have to get into the ports. The Chinese lost it, and there was the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. The UK won the war. What did the UK do to China? One, Hong Kong was given to UK. 5 Chinese ports were open for the Europeans to do business because the Chinese would do business with Europe only through one port, was Canton. The British East India Company, which has the opium plantation in Bengal, India. That's how the opium, the European part of the global trade of opium started with the British, with their opium plants in China and India to spread it into China. They had indemnity to UK. So UK said, you won't have to pay me. And then they gave the European extraterritoriality. What that means is the Chinese said to European, you can only trade at this port. We're only going to let you sit here. We're not going to let you get in the country and penetrate it. But extraterritoriality says that the English can now come in, and anything they do in China, the Chinese courts can't bother us. At that time that the British was breaking into China, the United States slipped in. The United States. Treaty of Wangjia, W-A-N-G-I-A, was from 1839 to 1844. So the United States said, well, my bigger cousin, they broke in, let me get a piece of the action. So they forced China, the U.S. was able to force out of China this treaty. The U.S. could use the Chinese port, the U.S. would participate in the opium trade, the U.S. would have extraterritoriality, means the U.S. can come into China, do whatever you want, and you can't lock us up, you can't, we don't have to follow the rules. The United States was given the ability to get tutors to learn Chinese, and they want to do missionary work. So the United States is now beginning to get it. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, China, again the naval war. But this time, instead of the Chinese Qing dynasty fighting off the British, the French jumped in. Now the French want a piece of the action. And the United States also aided. So in the Second Opium War, it was the British, it was the French, and the U.S. They fought against China. Now, China has that history. The trade is the same. Furniture, porcelain, silk, tea, opium. Payment is in silver and opium. The Treaty of Alban, the Convention of Peking. Canton was ceded to the UK. They gave another piece of Chinese. Manchuria was part of that area, was ceded to Russia. The Chinese had to pay 8 million talents of silver to the British, 8 million talents of sugar to the French. Opium was legalized. The Europeans became citizens. They can own land and they can go around and not be punished by the law. The British had the privilege now of carrying indentured Chinese to the America. So what you're going to see is the British moving in the indigenous people called Indians. They're moving them around the world as slaves. They drop them in Uganda. That's why you have Indians Uganda. They drop them in South Africa. That's why you have who's that lawyer, that famous? Okay, it'll come to me. That's why they dropped them in Trinidad. They're moving the slaves around. They moved us around. They now moved in. Now they got the Chinese. So they engage in international slave trade, international opium trade.
You talking about Gandhi?
Gandhi.
Yeah.
As Doc said, I don't know the history that well. Doc said Gandhi got mad because they treated him like an African.
That's right. That's right.
You know.
Like a who?
Huh?
Like a who?
Yeah. Chinese Exclusion Act in the United States of 1882 of the United States. And the UK, when that second time they broke into China, they were able to get into Peking and they burned and looted the Summer Palace. So that means if you can go to Britain, you can see all the stuff they stole out of it. This is the history that I'm repeating as an American citizen. I'm an African American. I'm an African to tell you that that's where I come from, and I'm American is only due to citizenship.
Right.
So don't let people tell you Afro, Afro this, Afro. They always try to shorten the African part. Okay, we have 2 more pages as we come down. And the page labeled 3 is going to be dealing with Russia. Russia is a country that's about 7, 6, 7, okay. You good? Russia, as it is today, is a country which is about 7 square miles. United States is 3. So Russia is about 2 1/3 bigger than the United States. And you have to go back on the history of what is now Russia, because many of those, Russia presently, right now, is controlled by white Russians. They control the basic economy, their economy, and they control the military. They are the ones who give security to Russia. But when you look at Russia, you see there are about 20 different groups. Muslims, Chinese, Asian people. So it's a country that has 20 ethnic, but each ethnic group, using that term, is totally independent to do whatever they have to do according to blah, blah, blah. But only the whites take care of security. Can you imagine African people saying, you African, you can do, we give you this section of land, as the Muslim ask for 5 states, you do exactly what you want to do, we don't bother you. That's what Russia does to those groups of non-whites that are with them. The people, they got no problem with it.
Right.
The white Russians run it. So Russia is 3, 6, 7 million square miles. It's 11 zones. When this Russian-Ukrainian war broke out, they say we could break Russia. Russia's not important. But when they did the sanctions, which we will get to later, Europe and even the United States, the basic things that Europe, Britain, France, Germany, US, what do they get from Russia? The same thing they've been stealing from us in Africa. Food. Europe can't feed itself. The food that feeds Europe comes out of Africa and comes from the wheat and stuff from Kazakhstan and Russia. The Europeans can't feed itself. They're stealing it from us, but after World War I, they had to buy it from Russia. Food, oil, gas, coal, wood, rubber, minerals. The 5 or 6 things that make a society go, the Europeans and Americans have been living out of stealing from Africa, and now they have to pay it from Russia. So page 3 is just giving you a quick snapshot of what countries have been trying to break into Russia. Because if you take this big landmass, Russia got these forests and everything. So there's a reason why this war is here. So let's look at Russia. I'm not saying that I'm not making a judgment about conquest or no conquest, just doing reality. 3, Russia. The Crimean War was fought between Russia, was fighting against France, UK, and the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is now what you call Turkey. So in 1853-56, Russia was battling France and UK, which is England, and Ottoman. They're fighting over land in that area because everything there, you got the land by force. So the Russians had to fight them off. Russia-Turkey War, 1877-1878. Russia against Turkey. They're battling again. That's why when they say that Crimea belongs to the Ukraine, Crimea was brought under Russian control around 1715. They ripped it from the Ottoman Turks. Go down, Russia-Japanese War, 1905 to 1904. Russia and Japan are fighting on the western part. You see, you have to look at Russia. When you look at Russia, this is the west, and this is the east. East is where Europe is, and the west is where the Pacific is. So Russia's this big mass, and they've been fighting the Japanese and the Chinese over this, right or wrong. So So now the Russians are battling. Then come the French. There's a French invasion. Napoleon invades Russia from June the 6th, 1812, and they fight to 1812. In other words, the war breaks out. France puts together an army of a number of countries, and they go to invade Russia. And that was in 1812. It was a 6 month. Napoleon and his army got wiped out. Whether it was from weather or whether it was something, they were trying to break in. Why are they breaking in? Because if you look at the structure, geography of Russia, you look at the rivers, a vast area. Got to have resources. They got water. They got food. They were breaking in for that. Then, that was 1812. That World War I broke out. Now we jumping, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of who Russia has been fighting off all this time. And this Ukrainian-Russian war is just another attempt to bring down Russia and rip it. Okay. Then you have the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1922. World War I breaks out. The Russians are fighting. The Germans try to get into Russia, again, to get the resources. Russia's holding them off. But during that period of 1917, there's a civil war. People the people are uprising against the Tsar.
That's right.
There's a civil war. So what happened was the so-called, and I give you the name, the Tsar was being overthrown. Lenin and the rest of them. The West are saying, wait now, we don't want these people, whoever they call themselves, communists in this group, to take over the government. So in other words, Russia is fighting the war. War breaks out in 1914. But in 1917, there's turmoil in internal Russia, and Russia stops the war. So the West is the United States, they look and see, well, we're doing business with the Tsar. Now these new group of people are going to come in. So what happened was, during the Civil War, what they call an Allied invasion of Russia, and I give you the name, the UK, United States, France, Australia, South Africa, and Canada, those all white countries, Japan and others, got an army together, intervened into the Civil War with the idea of keeping the Tsar in place and stopping the revolution.
Right.
But the key thing is that war was 1918 to 1922. So you had an invasion. The same people who Russia is fighting, Russia is here and Ukraine is here. Russians are fighting the Ukraine, but Ukraine is backed by the United States and NATO. It's a proxy war. That proxy war that's being fought, who's NATO? The same group of countries that got together in 1918 to invade Russia. UK, US, this whole list are the same countries fighting against Russia now. UK, US, France, Australia, the same country. Then we go to World War I. The Germans try to break into Russia. They couldn't get in. 1914, 1918. Then you go to World War II. Same thing. The Germans fight. 1939, 1945. They're trying to get into Russia again. Now, Russia fought them off, and we have post-World War II. Russia has part of Europe, the United States had part. At that time, we have to remember or recollect that the UK, United States, and France, these are colonial powers. They have Africans under their control. They have people in the Pacific under control. They are now fighting the Asians for their resources. So you have a group of countries, white Anglo-Saxon countries, England, France, that group, they got a big, they already took Canada, Australia, Canada, and US. They're inside stealing from Africa. They're in Asia, battling the Asians for their resources. But they also got something going if we can rip off Russia. So the same group of people who intervened in Russian Civil War in 1918 are the same group who will come back to fight now in the Ukrainian-Russian war. The United States, England, France against Russia. So that's why I brought this to you, so that you understand when we get into why in June of this year in St. Petersburg, Russia, 81 countries, and all those countries are countries of color. If you exclude the Chinese, it's India, Brazil, all of Africa, Central South. They're going to meet in St. Petersburg in June of 2023. And the agenda is to make a global currency to replace the US. And they're going to base it on gold. These are the countries which no longer buy the US currency. And we'll get into that. Now, after World War II ended, there are three plots, not land, when you plot against something.
Plan.
Yeah, plan. They call it Operation. Now, the Soviet Union was strong and powerful. At that time, Africa's under colonial rule. This is 1945, okay? Africans still under colonial rule. The Asians are still under colonial rule. The Central and South Americans are still under colonial rule. The Caribbean. All of these areas are still colonies of England, US, France. So they say, English, US, and France, they say, look, the only one strong enough militarily to contest us is the Russians. They call it the Soviet Union. Okay? So in other words, if we want to hold on to our ill-gotten colonies in Africa, if you want to hold on to what we are stealing from the Chinese and the Vietnamese, if you want to hold on to what rape we're doing to the Caribbean and South America, the only one who has a military power to contest us is the Soviet Union, quote-unquote Russia. Right. We got to break Russia. And you'll see why. So they thought up two plans according to what you can look at. I'm pretty sure there are more. They call it Operation Unthinkable. In 1945, the UK hook up with Poland and say, let's invade Russia. Let's try it, just like they went into Russia before. Let's see if we can get in and knock it off. Because remember, most of Russia's cities and industrial bases are east of the Urals. In other words, Russia, this is all Russia, right? There's a set of mountains called the Ural. Most of the white Russians live in the eastern part of what is Russia, from Moscow up to the Ural Mountains. From the Ural Mountains in is all the other non-whites. But most of the industries and cities are in from Moscow up to the Ural Mountains, okay? So the British says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go with the Poles, we're going to go with some of the Germans. Let's put together an army to invade into Russia. Knock off Moscow, the same thing Napoleon tried, it didn't work, Germany tried, we're going to succeed. The problem, they said, with the plan that the British thought up was they weren't strong enough. I mean, Russia at that point had 1 million, 2 million men under arms. Only if the United States would go in might it succeed. But it wouldn't succeed either because the United States is, their main military is their Air Force and Navy. The United States doesn't have good. China and Russia, these countries keep large men under arms, 1 million, 2, 3 million. The United States doesn't do that. So the United States didn't have the ground troops to go in with the British and the Poles to invade. The thing is to get in to the eastern part, get Moscow. So again, what's in the eastern part of these Ural Mountains where whites live? The cities, the industries, the oil fields. That's what they want to seize. Break Russia and then seize it. That plan, they can get away. Then they had a second plan that you can pick up. It's called Plan Totality, 1945. The United States planned a nuclear attack on Russia and its cities and its industries. Now, I don't know why they didn't do it. Maybe they didn't do it. Some of the books say they didn't have enough atomic bombs. But they had a plan to nuke Russia. Then they had another plan, Operation Drop Shot. 1945, U.S. was to begin a nuclear attack on Russian cities and industry. So Russia has always had a threat. It started with Napoleon, then went to the Germans 2 times. They tried to get in 2 times. Then they went with a whole Western intervention. So the Russians are dead serious when they said after World War II, don't move NATO to our borders. The United States didn't listen. Okay. And now you have the Ukrainian-Russian war. And who are they fighting? UK, US, France, and NATO. The same group of people that tried to overthrow the Russian Revolution in 1918, the same set of people are at it. Now, the last page, we're going to deal with Russia because it touches on Africa. And so you'll begin to see why the world, how did the world line up between the Ukrainian-Russian war? Russia. This is the history that Russia, you call it the Soviet Union, has with Africa. The first Ethiopian-Italian War, 1895 to 1896, when Italy said, look, I got to get me some colonies too. So they pick on Ethiopia. You can't invade the rest of Africa because the rest of Africa is cut up with the English and the French. But nobody got to invade Ethiopia. So the Italians said, I'm going in. So the first Ethiopian-Italian War was 1895 to 1896. Ethiopia against Italy. What was Russia's role in it? Russia assisted the Ethiopian with advisors, with equipment, and arms. Okay? So Russia was able to will have the arms that were equal to the Italian arms, which the Africans didn't have yet. Okay? That's Russia's contribution to it. Now, this is not a complete, but just to put Russia there. African wars of liberation. Against who? Europe and the United States. Russia, again, it assisted in arms, equipment, etc. Okay? Then you go back to the Berlin-Brussels Conference on Africa, 1885, 1886, it was about the partition of Africa into colonies. Who sat down in that conference? It was all the European powers, it was the United States, and it was Russia. United States did take a part. They took Liberia, which they had already controlled,
Right.
and they took a piece of Congo Free State. So if you tell you they didn't do it, it's a lie. And Russia. So you got the Europeans, and you have the Russians. The Russians are Europeans. Okay. But they sat down. Who took the colonies? U.S. and the Europeans. Russia didn't take a piece, didn't steal anything from you. Now, whether you could say, well, they had so much, they didn't take anything from you. That's the history. Then you swing over as we wind down on 4. You go to the Chinese. Because now Russia and China are in a partnership. Because the people here said, we're going to knock off Russia, then we're going to get the U.S. I mean, we're going to knock off Russia, and then we're going to get to China. What do you think they were going to do? So let's look at the Chinese Civil War. From 1927 to 1949. They were fighting before that, but you got to date it. Different groups of people battling. Because if you look at present-day China, you know the Chinese, you know that Great Wall of China?
Right.
Let's say this is what is now China. The Great Wall of, this part of China, the Great Wall, China, present-day China is this. The Great Wall runs north to south, only on the eastern part of China. So what you look at a map of China, and you take the Great Wall here, only the eastern third, the wall is here. You know why? Because there are different types of Chinese. Han and this white Chinese and black. They were trying to stop other Asians who would go in, because people fight over the land. So that's why the wall only runs here. After the Chinese wins the Civil War, Mao Zedong invades. Say that again?
That's what you're saying, Mao.
Yeah, Mao Zedong invades and takes this part of what is now China. They take it from the Tibetans. And then they go and take this western, but just like the United States, took this, and then they took that big chunk in the northwest, then they took up to the Mississippi, and then they just built the country U.S., killing people.
Right.
And that's what the Chinese did. They went in, they invaded Tibet, added that piece to it. That's where the water river. And then they went in and took this western part, the Zhejiang province, where China right now has 59 different distinct ethnic groups recognized by the white Chinese. If you look at the people in the western two-thirds, it's mainly desert. So if you look at it, China is run by white Chinese. I don't know if you call them Han or whatever the other name. But there are almost 59 distinct groups which are not, you would not say they're Chinese, what you call Xing in them. Okay, so they put it together here. So people have always fought over the land. So when you do the China, as we wind down, the Chinese Civil War, they're fighting.
Chiang Kai-shek, Mao Zedong.
Right. Now, as we wind down, so there's what they call, one group of Chinese, they name them, they call it as he said, the Comintern, Chiang Kai-shek, backed by the West and United States. Then you have the Communist Chinese, which will be Ho Chi Minh, Mao Zedong, backed by Russia.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Then, yeah, the nationalists. Then we can touch on The second one, beyond that, is the Korean War, but it's out of sync. The next thing we should jump down to is the Chinese-Japanese War. The Chinese-Japanese War was when Japan went into China in 1937, and then the war ended in 1945. So in other words, even though Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalists, and Mao Zedong, they've been fighting since 1900. They say 1927 to 1949. They were fighting each other, but there was an interval where they had to both get together to knock out the Japanese, okay?
Right.
After they knocked the Japanese out, okay, the Civil War started in 1927. They're battling, killing each other, doing whatever you gotta do. It's interrupted by the Japanese invasion. As soon as the Japanese were defeated in 1945, they resumed the Civil War.
Right.
In 1945 to 1949, the so-called communists won the war, the Civil War. Chiang Kai-shek, he left, they left, and they went to Taiwan. Now, if you go online, Taiwan is run by the white Chinese, right? The Han Chinese. Right now it's run by them. The government of Taiwan, the Chinese, there are at least 10 to 15 distinct, we mentioned this before, there are 10 to 15 distinct groups of people who live on this Taiwan with the white Chinese that were there thousands of years before the white Chinese came in 1700. We mentioned that before. China claims that island, the white Chinese, by force. But when you look at the people, the skin, the color, when you look at the people who were living there, in other words, you and I go to Taiwan, the white Chinese run it. Then you say, well, how come I go around in the mountain area and you show me in your book there are at least 20 distinct people who live on this island, and by the language and stuff, they live here before you got here. It's neither here nor there. Because people, okay. So, China, the Civil War resumes, the communists win, Chiang Kai-shek, he goes over 1949. Why 1949? Because the big China states that they do not want to invade Taiwan. That they have agreed with the Taiwanese, meaning the Chinese part of it, for reunification by the year 2049. In other words, remember in 1849 when the Chinese are being beaten down and conquered by the Europeans. So the Chinese just set a date that in 2049 we want to reunify the two Chinas together. They don't want a war. The Taiwanese, the Chinese Taiwanese, they have half their investment in industry in big China. They want unification. There are two parties in Taiwan. One party wants to go with the West, and one party want to go with China. The United States is pushing the war. Nobody else is pushing the war. Okay. So we got the Korean War, then you have the Chinese, Japanese, and then you have the Indochina War, which is the French against Vietnam.
Right.
Now the Asians are getting the whites out. Then you have the second Indochina War, which is called the Vietnamese War. They got rid of the United States.
Right.
And now we ended here with the U.S.-China war. That's what they're saying on TV. We're going to war. When I say we, whoever runs this country, we're going to war. It just seems that everybody's saying it happened to be a white male, rich banker or businessman or a military person. Okay? There's supposed to be what they call a U.S. America's going to war with China in the year 2025. They're announcing the war. There's one trick to it. a third of your tax dollars go to the military. So when they send aid to Ukraine or whatever the military budget, the way it is cut up, $100 billion is sent to the Pentagon. The Pentagon will then hypothetically take and give the military-industrial complex of that $100 billion. Let's say they give them $80 billion. What happened to the 20? The Pentagon takes 15 of it, and it's documented by certain universities that the Congress of the United States receives $5 billion a year from contribution from the corporation. That's how Congress get their cut. So they say that 95% of all laws passed in the United States, city, state, and federal, are passed in favor of the big corporations.
Right.
So all of that aid, when it goes out, the military-industrial complex go and take it and build weapons and ships that don't work because they're too busy sticking it in here. The Pentagon get their cut and Congress get their cut. According to the records, $5 billion. Now, when you divide up $5 billion by 500 congressmen and senators, it comes out to about $20 million each. Now, if you're a congressman and somebody hit you with $20 million each, you're going to keep shut. I didn't say they have, but you see the concept. So as we end this so-called war that they announced to the world, we're going to war with Russia, with China in 3 years. But the people in the newspapers and your Secretary of Defense, Austin, who's just part of the military industrial, there's one catch. We need to not take a third of the taxpayers' money. We need half of the taxpayer money to prepare the weapons to fight China. So you understand? You announcing a war? No, it's just another damn gimmick to rape the treasury. Your cities and stuff don't mean anything. So now you announcing the war. We now get ready for the war. Look. So we formally concluded the formal part of it. We're going to have question and answer. I just want to make a small comment. It has been demonstrated that Russia is the strongest military for ground war. Nobody's going to beat Russia. Nobody can beat Russia. The Ukraine said they shot down 10 Russian these missiles. Forgot the name of them. Anyhow, you know the speed of the missile? Mach 13. You think you can shoot down a missile that's traveling 10,000 miles an hour? And Russia is just destroying, right or wrong, Ukraine. Nobody can touch it.
Shooting at a mosquito.
Okay? So it's already been demonstrated that if there was a war between Russia is now fighting a war against NATO, because NATO is supplying the Ukraine. So Russia now went in with a small group of men. About 100,000, they say, 120,000. They thought that would be enough to convince them for peace. Zelensky, or whatever his name is, they were ready for peace. But United States and Britain told them, we're not, fight on, we'll keep fighting. Okay? Ukraine, I'm only reporting what I hear. Ukraine, they said they had a population of 34 million. It's down to 18 million. People have left for Russia, they have left for the rest of Europe. So Russia is systematically destroying everything. Electricity, the thing. Russia says they will call for peace. If necessary, if you look at the map, they may go all the way to west to the Polish border. In other words, if they keep fighting, there's a possibility there won't be a Ukraine. So I'm not analyzing, I'm just repeating what little I understand. I just wanted to show you there is a history for this war that has been initiated by the West. So you have this basic information. We can take a break and you can go. We need comments and we need questions and we need input from all of us who are here so that we can clarify. It's in the question and answer period that we can clarify all the things that we're talking about. I just wanted to present a picture of what we have here to give you a realistic picture of what the country's about. As far as I'm concerned, my analysis, my own personal analysis from here, during the beginning of the United States of America, and I'm not saying other countries don't do it, from the 13 colonies, the way it's structured, only a handful of men, white Anglo-Saxon men, were the governments of the 13 colonies, local, state, and federal. They made the rules and regulations for everybody caught up in that. And that's the same thing that you have here. Whoever is in this country, what is the agenda of this country domestically is run by a handful of white Anglo-Saxon men. The foreign policy, as Mendy Butler, is run by these men for these men. So nothing, according to these documents, are for the masses of people. So now, like before, you have a handful of white Anglo-Saxon men running the place. Domestic and foreign policy. And we could then go further for what you feel you want to say or to indicate. So we're going to go for Brother Ray. You go for your break or question and answer now, comments now, so we could add to it and say, well, look, this is wrong. It's only what I picked out of the history books. Ray. Question and answer. You want it now or you want to take a quick break?
You want to take a break?
It's up to you. I can go.
Okay, question next.
Okay. It could be a question, it could be a comment, it could be anything you want. Just talk loud enough so everybody can hear. Okay, brother there first.
I got a few of them. I'll just ask one to allow other people.
Yeah, okay, no problem. But you got to talk loud so
All
that
right,
people...
all right. Yeah, so my question was, so thank you, first of all, thank you for all of this, right? I was familiar with some of this, but there was a lot that I didn't learn more about, so I appreciate you for sharing your time and your energy with us. I guess my question is more so, right, so I understand sort of like when we talk about the history, Russia has always seemed to be obviously more aligned with African nations than the United States has, in terms of them having independence, in terms of opposition to the United States, right? They've sort of been aligned and supported those African nations. So I'm wondering two things, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the Wagner Group. So I'm wondering, what do you think of critiques about the Wagner Group, which is what I understand is a mercenary group that operates out of Russia, that does things in Africa, that's involved in many African nations. That's the first part of my question, and something else attached to it, right? I also wanted to know, if you feel comfortable sharing, right? Do you think that this, like, sort of that support that Russia has given to African nations and Africans, do you think that is more of a morally guided arrangement, or do you think it's a strictly politically guided arrangement? And I have some other questions, but I'll let other people speak.
Okay.
Before I go.
It's from my limited understanding of the Wagner Group is, it is an organizational, okay. The Russians are fighting the Ukrainians. They're using the word Wagner. But there's also the Muslim, the Chechens. They put a contingent, because they part of Russia. They're fighting, so you have Russians fighting, you have the Wagner Group fighting, you have the Chechens. The Wagner Group is, from what I understand, is, if you want to call it a mercenary, you can call it a mercenary. It's a private, I'm just using the word, a private group, contractors,
Okay, yeah,
that work under the guidance of Russia.
okay.
Russia uses it. See, when you start going through the
Like
history,
the US does.
yes. Look, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When you had the Opium War, who fought against the Chinese? It was UK. But the UK had contingents of Indians from India. They had for Sri Lanka. Just like we fight the white man's war, they're Puerto Ricans, they're blacks. So that's not anything different that they use the Wagner Group. So Wagner Group is a quote private organization, but they work under the Russian government. And they work in coordinate. So when you listen to different accounts, when they went in to fight in Bakhmut, here's the Ukraine. They're being shelled. Russians are shelling them. It's not Chechen, that's not Wagner shelling. It's the Russian government that's shelling them. It's the Russian government that's bombing them. It's the Russian government that hit it. The Wagner Group is a group that, you want to call them a nurse, they work in conjunction and coordinate with them, fighting for Russia. It's as simple as that. Now, as far as the Wagner Group in Africa, especially, okay, we had presented here previously where we got the number of U.S. military bases in Africa. About 30 or 40. The people who talk about a Wagner Group coming in, they conveniently forget, what the hell is 30 U.S. bases? So what's the big deal if the Africans invite the Wagner Group in 3 or 4 or 5 African countries? But it was okay when the French used to station their troops in Africa, when the United States has military bases. So I'm not saying that Wagner Group is good or bad, but from what I understand, what they're printing is the African countries feel that they need or want an outside military force to help train. So what they're doing is they're pushing out the French and replacing them with Russia. The people who write the article about the Wagner Group in Africa, they have to tell you that African countries ask them to come in, and they have a right to ask whoever the hell they want in their country to fight with them. Those people, when you hear them, they don't tell you about the French. The Wagner Group is replacing the French. The African countries want them there. The United States has military bases there. Not heavy bases. So that's the best I can tell you about that. And what's the other question?
The question was about, I guess it's like a bigger question, and that's a tricky one. If you think that, what do you think, I guess like the reason for this arrangement is? Do you think it's purely, do you think that there's something with are the Russians less racist than the Europeans, or is this just about economics and politics? Or maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. Let me answer it this way. How much time we got?
2 days.
Okay. I heard an interview, the same question you had asked. I saw an interview of the Vice President of Nigeria speaking about the difference in doing business with the Chinese and doing business with the West. And what he was saying was that the IMF and the World Bank, which is controlled by whites, he was saying, see, because the BRICS, they're developing their own bank. And all of the African Asians are going to stop using the IMF, the white man bank,
Right.
And they're gonna start using the BRICS back. Okay, but we can get into that later. The Nigerian vice president and another, he says, let me show you the difference. He said, when the African countries, and you go on website and they're all bringing it out. The African countries, when they borrow from the IMF, they get high interest rates, 30%. A short period of time to repay. And you have all these conditions. The same thing like they keep us in debt, student debt, and all that other stuff. The Chinese come along, and they give you the loan at 3%. But not with all these conditions. So the other guy said, and one of the ambassadors from South Africa, the elder female, was saying, the Africans don't default on it. So you giving us 36% interest when we don't default under the harshest condition. Then you give interest-free loan to France and United States. Well, because it's white, you know, the same thing. That's one way I would answer the question there. The another one says, China is here because they need what we got. And then the ambassador said, but China came here with that kind of colonial attitude. And soon as when we put them in place and say, you ain't getting a damn thing until you change your attitude, because we already have the experience of white people disrespecting us. So they said, China adjusted their attitude. So now, you now want the technology. Remember, what do they call it when the Europeans begin to get technology? They call it the Industrial Revolution. All came out of Africa. The Industrial Revolution is based on metals, based on cloth, and based on when they took us out, they took our machines, they took our weaving. All you got to do is go to Egypt or Sudan to the museum, and you'll see the fabric, the beautiful fabric, all of it, the artwork. So Europe and the United States and Europe the technology was a technology transfer from Africa to the Europeans, the United States. They took the ones of us who were just laborers, and they took all of our scientists. It's not unreasonable to say why most of the inventions was done by Africans. So the technology went from Africa to Europe and the U.S. Due to certain circumstances and stuff, the technology advanced, make things in the United States and Europe. So black people and others make all this technology, but who gets to control it? White people. So the United States, for any number of reasons, got a certain amount of technology, and they built up. And then, because they're stupid and greedy, they sell all of the technology. I said, look, why should we pay $25 an hour to a white man to make a car when we can let black people, African, come migration up, replace the whites, and we give them $10? Why are we going to do that when we can outsource it to Canada and Mexico? Why are we going to do that when we outsource it to China? The technology they got from Africa. Now, with all of the inventions that Africans had made with the light bulb and stuff, that's not white people's technology. That's African technology. Then the technology they took from the indigenous people. Then, during World War II, you had what they call Lend-Lease. The United States had laws that said that they weren't supposed to interfere on either side in World War I and II. So they came up with a Lend-Lease. I'll lend you this. Okay. So United States manufacturing made tanks, go to World War I and II, make tanks and fighter bombers, all of that. And most of the technology went to England and to Russia. Without the tanks and the airplanes and stuff to Russia, Russia beat the Germans. By the time the United States entered World War II, 3 months, Russia had lost.
That's right.
Putin said they had lost. The last count was 39,500,000, and they say Putin shut it down. They lost 40 million people. United States didn't lose hardly anybody. The British didn't lose, so it's worse for Germany. But in order for Russia to fight Germany to get tanks and jeeps and stuff, they had to move their factories. They had to move their factories, east of the Ural. In other words, you got to take everything on the east coast of the United States and move it to the Mississippi, right, over past the Mississippi. So Russia couldn't manufacture. So the United States made the planes and the this and everything. And they brought it in to north and to Vladivostok on the Pacific. That's how Russia fought Germany with the United States' plane and blah, blah, blah. After the war, the U.S. says to England, you're going to pay me. And they say to Russia. So they have what they call a reverse Lend-Lease. So Russia, in order, when World War I was over, the Americans asked their cousins from England, you're going to pay me. So England had to give them gold. The second time of World War II came around, the United States helped their cousins. They didn't have no gold. So their white cousin says, you have Africa as a colony. This is how you can repay me. They call it colonial preference. What England was doing in India, in Africa, and other places, they kept the tariff for trade so high that they blocked U.S., German, and other Europeans couldn't do business in Africa. So that way the English kept everything. So the white American says, you can't pay me now in gold and for World War I because you broke. But what I'll do is I'll take a piece of Africa. So you when you read the documents on the what you call that conference? The
Berlin Conference.
Berlin, not the Berlin. No, it's it'll come to us, huh?
Balfour?
No, in 1944, the conference they had up in New Hampshire. Well, it'll come to us.
Berlin Conference?
No.
It's I can't think of. Okay, what happened was in World War II.
The Balfour Agreement.
Pardon me? Okay, in World War
Balfour Agreement?
Pardon me?
The Balfour Agreement?
No, it'll come to us in a minute, but the time. So what they had to do, England paid in gold, but they didn't have anything to play in gold anymore, so the Americans sat down at the conference, Bretton Woods Conference, and said, you got to give me a piece of Africa. You can't pay me gold, cut me into Nigeria's this, South Africa's this, to cut them up. So it's called Lend-Lease. The English had
It's called gangsterism.
It's gangsterism, but a fancy term for Lend-Lease. Britain said they were strong, said nobody's going to be able to trade, nobody's going to be able to trade in Africa. But now, they had to cut the United States, so any business dealings or any property the United States government or private have in Africa came as a payment from the British. The United States didn't build a damn thing in Africa.
Okay,
Let me just finish quickly there. So you understand that, right? In the reverse Lend-Lease, the British had developed radar. The British had developed a certain technology. They had to give it to the United States. All that technology in this didn't come from the U.S. The British did it. Russia, to pay back the United States, they paid them back like they did in World War I. Gold, diamonds, minerals. It's called a reverse Lend-Lease. So when you consider all that wealth that Russia had to pay, not to you and me, but to the capitalists, and then England had to cut the United States into Africa and get all that technology. That's what pushed U.S. so far. It's just that these greedy white people didn't understand that if you ship all your technology to China, that you would be in this position. But they said, don't worry about it. We have a big military, and we have our what you call a money system. We can do it that way. Okay?
Okay, anybody from the Zoom audience want to ask a question?
Yeah, what was that agreement again?
Bretton Woods.
At Bretton Woods.
Bretton Woods agreement.
Just Google Bretton Woods, and you will see what it is. To make a pardon, hold on.
Is
Okay.
it also called the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act of 1934?
Say that again.
Was it also, what preceded it, was it the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act of 1934?
I'm not familiar with that, so I can't answer your question.
Okay, I got you. Bretton Gap,
The
okay.
Bretton Woods Conference, we have presented before. Basically, Britain was going down, the U.S. was going up. And at the Bretton Woods, it was called from the UN. And that's when they made the deal. To go through it very quickly, there were 74 delegates that met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Of the 74 delegates, the two primary powers were U.S. and Britain. Britain's going down, U.S. is going up. So the white people got together, said, we got the guns, Africans are colonized, the Asians we got Africa under colonies, we got Asia under colonies, we got the Caribbean, everybody under colonies. The hell with these people, it's me and you. Me, white man, America, you, white man, Britain. They rewrote the rules of the economic rules, okay? Now, when they rewrote it, they created the IMF and World Bank, where everybody in the world who needs loans to build have to go to the IMF and World Bank. That's them. We have the biggest navy, biggest army. We're going to rule the world with the gun. It's called the world. When you hear Biden, they say the world, the rules, the global rules of the world. They call it the rules-based order. World rules-based order means that they white, they can go in and intervene. That's why they've been, 36 countries have been bombed all by the West. So they sat down, made the IMF and World Bank. So they're going to control the Asian, the African, and the Central South American through money, loans. They're going to control you there militarily and economically. They're going to use our military that way, and we're going to use the monetary system to control you the monetary way. It's called the Bretton Woods. And one last thing, when they made that conference, of the 74 delegates who made up these rules and regulations, only 4 countries sitting came from Africa. 1944. Ethiopia, which was the only one that was there that was independent. Egypt was there, but they were under the British. Liberia was there, they were under the U.S. And South Africa was there because they were under the whites. 0 represent. Africa had not a damn thing to do with writing that. All of the Asians, the only Asians that were there was Russia, because it has an Asiatic part, and Chiang Kai-shek. And then you had a smattering of some European and Central and South American countries. That was a white man's country to structure it the way they wanted structured. So with that Lend-Lease, a lot of the technology that U.S. had came from Britain, came from Africa. And then you had the last thing, the Lend-Lease, it'll come to me. So this is what the rest of the world is coming from under. When we get into question and answer at the never lecture, you can see there's a change that is coming. And I'll end here. There was these websites, there were these white people who deal in this website. And he is saying that they call it a multipolar world. And he said he called it a bipolar world. And he said, let me explain. He said, you have on one pole lily white countries like the United States and NATO. He broke it down to race. On the other pole, you have the rest of the world, the Chinese, the Indians, the Africans, the Iranians, they're all people of color. And what they all have in common was that every one of those countries of color were invaded, enslaved, and were a colony of the whites. So that cycle has been broken. So that's, you're getting that part of it, and we can go into it further. As we asked Dr. Ben, how these white people going to get, how are we going to repay the white people? He said the world's going to get it. So what I will end here, and then we can do later, we go another session to go into the details. As I repeat, we was talking to the brother. In St. Petersburg in June, 81 countries are meeting with Russia. You heard of the BRICS. They are now sitting down, restructuring the whole global monetary system based on gold, because those countries, they do most of the trade in the world. You don't need the United States in the global trade and stuff. They don't make anything. So you're already in that transition, and the reason, and then I'll end right here. When the war broke out between Ukraine and Russia, the United States and the West were trying to go around the world getting people on their side. The countries and global countries of the world, except for the white countries, the Asians, the Africans, the Central Caribbean, they all, half of them remain neutral and half of them back Russia. It is those countries that were colonized, those countries that have been invaded by the U.S., those countries who've had economic sanctions. Individually, they were afraid and could not move against the United States. But now they say, look, China is the largest economy. Russia's got the strongest military. We don't have to worry about sanctions from the U.S. We don't have to worry about military invasion. So those 81 countries, and they get rid of all the U.S. debt. They're selling all the U.S. bonds. They're doing trade without the dollar, barter and everything else. So the war has, this is where Africa is. This is where Asia. They find now that this is an opportunity for they want, the answer to your question is business. People want trade, they want food, they want housing and water. What the United States give you, they bomb you. They do a coup. Mexico said, I'm joining with the BRICS. There are 80 countries who want to join with the BRICS. Right now, and I end here, those 5 BRIC countries, officially by all agencies, are 33% of the global trade. Just those 5. United States, Japan, all of Europe, only 28. So those 5 countries have already surpassed the United States and the West in global trade. Now, when you add Saudi Arabia, because the BRICS is just Brazil, China, Russia, India, South Africa. Just those 5. When you add Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Egypt, what they're going to form is their own bank. So nobody's going to go to the IMF and World Bank. Nobody's going to have to worry about an invasion. Okay? And that's the beauty of it. And I'll just draw one analogy that really, the United States really made a major blunder. They sanctioned $300 billion of Russian money that was in Western banks and U.S. banks to try to break Russia. And then they cut them off of SWIFT, you know, that international trading. So now the rest of the world is saying, wait, I got money in the U.S., I got money in France. If they did it to Russia, I'll give you the analogy. You get in a dispute with a bank. The bank freezes your money. You got $50,000 in the bank, they freeze it. You can't touch it. Why? Because you can't prevent it. Then they cut off your credit card. So they freeze Russian money, cut them off from SWIFT, and then so it's equivalent to them freezing your bank account and cut off your credit card. What you gonna do? What do you think you're going to do the next day? Anybody want to answer?
Working over the bank.
You can go to another bank. Or you're going to form your own, right? You're going to get another system. So what that SWIFT system that the U.S. and West control, China, Russia, India, the BRICS, everybody got that. They already worked on the whole system. They don't even need the SWIFT. Who is going to leave money in the U.S. banks after that? And you know what these countries are doing? All of those treasury notes that the United States sell these treasury notes. And from this sale of treasury note, that's their credit card. Everybody's selling it. And nobody's buying the treasury note. What do you think is going to happen shortly to the United States economy when this country has been living off of the debt? They're dumping it. They're not going to leave anything. They're pulling it all out.
Question, Raji?
Well, it's more like an answer to his question. It's a little bit more than money. There are some people that call people in Greece Greeks. People identify themselves differently than we try to identify them. Some Greeks call themselves Macedonians. They don't want to be known as Greeks. And the same thing with Russia. Everybody has to say all white people or white people, but the Russians have a completely different culture, a completely different existence. They don't consider themselves Western European. From Peter the Great to the Tsar, they have not been the Western European mindset. They consider themselves Asiatic. And going back to your point regarding the various ethnicities that's in Russia, they look at them in the same way Gaddafi looked at the other tribes in Libya, where they gave them autonomy. And that's the difference in when they were dealing with countries like Africa and India, as well as China. They did not have the same Western mentality as your France, your England, your United States. They do not, they may be white, but they do not consider themselves European, nor do they consider themselves Western European. So it's a different mindset.
Yeah, let me just make a quick point. They asked the question, the United States has put in these labs in Ukraine. They got them in Sudan also. And they asked some of the Russian, says, look, the United States has been working on some kind of, like they say for us black people, some kind of genetic thing that they can put in to kill white Russia. And the guy says, how are you going to do that? We said, we mix with everything. Just what he's saying. You see how Putin look?
Yeah,
You see how Stalin look? You see how, it's like us, we mix. How you going to put it? Okay, so that, like you said, it's a whole different mindset.
Zoom audience, you got a question?
World War II. Is that what triggered World War II? The gap, the Britain Wood?
What?
Britain Wood in World War II.
Okay, Bretton Woods came after World War II. As World War II was winding down and it officially stopped in 1945, the Bretton Woods was held in 1944. It was United States getting together with their cousins, the English, to see how we're going to control the Africans who were under colonized, the Asians, and the rest of the people of color. All the people that had been colonized. So the Bretton Woods was 1944, the war finished 1945. So the Bretton Woods was just that conference that was called by the United States and England and UK to see how they're going to take the white from America going to be the big guy now to the whites from Britain, but we're still going to lock down the Asians, lock down the Africans, and lock everybody else down.
All right. Mike, you got a question? And that's the last one.
Yeah, just want to thank you for condensing a couple of centuries of history, certainly oppression, inside of an hour and change. Just want to ask you, with respect to what's going to happen between Taiwan and China, whatever's going to happen, it should not involve in any capacity any white man on the planet. They should not have a say in anything. They should not have a say in one blade of grass in China or one blade of grass in Taiwan. Let them handle it. And Europe, with all the threats coming out of Britain and America, to keep your hands off Taiwan, they should have nothing to do with it because their history with China is ugly and dripping in blood.
It's because you have a group of people who have a history of, as we did, they have a history of they have a history of killing and invading other people for whatever they have. You kill millions of indigenous people in what you call America. You kill hundreds of thousands, millions of indigenous people to get Canada. You knock off hundreds of thousands of millions to get Australia. When I was in Vanuatu, they had in the Pacific, the European would raid Vanuatu and these other Pacific islands. They call it blackbirding, slavery. What else do they come from? When you look at the Germanic tribes that invaded, as Professor Mackey tells them, they came into history as marauders.
Vandals. Yeah.
What can I tell you?
But next time, I know you don't have the time tonight, but you glossed over the 2 opium wars, or some might call it the Boxer Rebellion, what have you. But you didn't explain really what that involved, how they were putting and actually forcing Chinese people into drug dependency. So maybe you can say that for the next lecture.
Yeah, we could. Well, we couldn't go into detail because we had to put it in context. But just as the opium, remember during the 2 treaties, what did they force the Chinese? Open up your ports. Let us own land. Let us travel. Let us learn your language. Let us break down your culture of trade. So they had a certain culture of trade where they dealt with the Europeans just in Canton, just certain people. They broke it down to get in to China, so we can.
And they were hooked on opium.
Well, just like don't you have a international drug trade? It was before, but the Europeans documented. The British started it. The French came in on it. The American came in on it. And if you want to know who's running the global trade, you just go back to there. How do you think a lot of these things were built?
Yes.
You build your society. It's an ugly thing when the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History, they had a statue of Theodore Roosevelt. Y'all remember that? In front of the Museum of Natural History, when you first come in on the right, he's on a big horse. You have the Africans walking alongside of him, and he had the indigenous. Y'all remember that?
Yeah.
They took it away. You can't remind the world of who we are. They took it away. Why do you think they're doing this? Stuff we had a couple with these old riots and stuff, they start tearing down. They want to take away. You should have left all of those monuments and all of those southern. Why most of the generals and all of these statues were southern? They all white enslaved. They started the slave trade. The English sent his friends, his cousins as businesses. When you go to America, you take as many white slaves as you can get. We'll call them indentured servants. So slavery in the colonies began with white slavery. And you had slave revolts, white slave revolts. Then they said, okay, we got to get some black folks in here. They didn't treat the white people there any different than any other slave. Then they tried it on the indigenous, it wasn't working. Then they went and came and got us. And then we raised so much hell and so many revolts. The slaveholders in New York and the United States, what the colonies in the South told the king, don't send us any more Africans. We need people to be slaves. So that's when they did the Navigation Act, etc. And the English said in 1808, all slavery in the empire shall be abolished. African slavery.
Right.
So then they said we can't use Africans. They revolt. The Haitian vote just knocked the whole damn thing out of whack because all those countries came back. So they brought the indigenous Indian. They brought the so-called Indian. That's how they got to Trinidad. That's how they got in what you call this place, Jamaica. And Fiji, half the population are Indians brought there by the whites. Then when they went in, they raided Vanuatu, they raided all of those to build up the labor for Australia. So you have a history of a group of people, for whatever the reason, is documented. That's why I started out, feudalism, only a handful ruled.
Right.
Slavery was white slavery. Then a little bit of indigenous slavery. They wasn't going for that. Then they went to get us. And then the English went to get the Chinese. Oh, I forgot to mention the incarceration of the Japanese. You know, the internment camps. And they said of 120,000 Japanese they put in internment camp, they said there were less than 1 or 2% that you could consider a threat. They said, we got to lock them up because they're a threat to the United States. The Japanese, they're fighting Japan. They said less than 1% could have been considered a threat to justify. So they took them all away from the West Coast, took their farms, took their land, took their property, stripped them.
And didn't intern any Germans.
Not only that, but the Japanese that they brought to Hawaii, they let them work because they were slaves. So they used that as an excuse to strip the Japanese, the racism. And they used the Census Bureau to find out where the Japanese were.
Okay,
Did they get reparations?
all right, we gotta get Doc back to Jersey.
Let them say,
What you gonna say, Willie?
Do they get reparations?
But them Japanese got reparations. I'm looking for ours.
yeah, but when you go check the record, the amount they gave them compared to the tens of billions and hundreds, farmland, factories, it's the same thing after the Civil War. A certain percentage of us, half of us after the Civil War, official Civil War, were caught in what you call this thing when you stuck on the farm. Sharecroppers. A certain percentage of us split, Kansas and stuff. And then a certain percent, we made an agreement with the government. They gave us from part of North Carolina, or South Carolina, part of Georgia, you know, the Gullah, 20 miles deep. We don't own a dime of it now. They took it all back, right? They burned Wall Street. So what they did was they undid it. They brought you back. They said, these people are too productive and stuff. We can't have them. So they destroyed it and brought you back into this great United States of America.
Okay, I don't think Dr. Lewis can answer the next question in 5 minutes.
We can try.
Okay,
Go on. Gotta get it quick.
there's no way he can answer
He's
the
gonna
next
regulate
question
it,
in
but
5
you can't.
minutes. We gotta get Doc back
If you
to
don't start
Jersey.
talking, you ain't gonna get in.
He'll be here